Can Quibi's short-form videos dethrone Netflix and YouTube?
And what are telcos doing with mobile data during the coronavirus lockdown?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there, welcome to your weekly slice of Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the tech news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, as always, by Adam Turner, a man who was doing the 30-second work commute years before it was fashionable. Adam, what's the commute like these days between your bedroom and the home office?
Oh, mate, it's rough. It's got a lot worse since the lockdown began. The traffic getting on the stairs is pretty bad, and some mornings I even have to queue up for my bloody coffee.
Sounds shocking. At least you don't have to dodge a traffic helicopter, I guess.
Some days I do. I live near an airport. It gets pretty rough.
This week, we're doubling down on the Kidman goodness with Finder Editor-in-Chief and a man who sounds suspiciously like me, only faster, Angus Kidman. Angus, welcome back to the show.
It's a pleasure to virtually be here.
Now, Gus, you've been known to work from home and, in fact, plenty of other places besides. What's your key work from home when you can't go outside much tip?
Well, I've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, and I've realized that it's actually a good idea to get into the Zoom meeting but then step away from the computer. A lot of my colleagues just spend all their time answering Slack messages and not actually being in the meeting. If you're on Zoom, make that the one thing you're doing, and you'll actually find it's a better and more productive experience.
Nice tip. Now, we're all a lot less mobile these days, thanks to the coronavirus lockdown, but telcos are still trying to woo customers with data-heavy deals, and we'll be diving into whether they're worth your time a little later. But first, there's a new streaming video player on the block in the form of Quibi. And Adam, I thought a Quibi was the junior form of a hairless North American ape, but it's not, and it's not as if we're starved for entertainment these days. What's the story here?
Yeah, if you had have asked me sight unseen, did we need another streaming video service? I would have said absolutely not. But having spent a bit of time with it, they could be on a winner here. So the short version is, all puns intended, that Quibi is for short content. It's 5 to 10 minute episodes, but it's very polished. So it's not like your TikToks and your what used to be Vine and all that kind of stuff. It is all professional content. It was created by an ex-Disney guy and the DreamWorks co-founder. They've put $1 billion into it. They've got all these high-profile content providers. It's basically what Apple TV is, but squished down to 5 to 10 minute episodes. And there's a lot up there to begin with, but I'm not quite sure if it's had long-term appeal. Gus, what do you think? Is there room for something like this?
I think there potentially is room. I've also had a bit of a play with it. I really like its turnstile feature, which is the fact that if you rotate your phone, the video actually adjusts. It doesn't just reframe itself. Actual graphics and things move around. So It's really been designed to be used on a wide variety of screens. I think that's quite a neat feature. I think it's just really, because we've known about this for a while. They got like $1 billion in venture capital last year. So we've known it was coming, but just launching it in the middle of the pandemic is just the worst possible idea, because the whole notion is that this is something to be useful when you're out and about and on the go. And you think, okay, I don't want to watch a really long thing. Maybe I'm only taking like a 10-minute bus trip or I'm standing in a queue. I'll watch something. But so few of us are in that world right now. I feel like obviously they had the plan. They wanted to launch it. They wanted to get it out there. But I wonder if it's just a not bad product idea at absolutely the wrong time.
Yeah.
They probably had to launch in order to kind of get somewhere at some point, though. Their billion-dollar venture capitalist partners will not have been happy with the idea of, we'll just sit on this for 12 months, because some of what they've got, of course, will not age as well as other parts.
Yeah.
The mobile story thing, though, is really interesting. You mentioned the turnstile thing, and it's not just, as you get with like a YouTube, for example, where it's just square if you're viewing it portrait style and full screen if it's landscape. They're actually shooting and editing for both formats simultaneously. So when you do turn, you don't necessarily lose picture elements, which is quite neat, although it doesn't work all that well on larger mobile devices. It's fine on a phone, but I was testing it out on an iPad, and because I figured, well, look, nice bigger screen and so on. And the issue there is the content is fine, but the user interface is portrait only. So even if you want to watch in landscape, you've got to turn the whole thing around to actually select what you want to watch, then turn it back, which is just so clunky.
I was going to ask if you could watch this thing on big screens like computers and televisions, and then I was worried that maybe I'm showing my age.
You are showing your age
Yeah.
completely. And there's no support for it yet. And I think Turnstile is the reason why, because it's just, that's not that you're going to be standing there rotating your television, admittedly,
Yeah.
but I think it is very reliant on being delivered through that app. And we know from previous experience that like actually getting integration into smart TVs is tricky. So maybe their solve for that could be in terms of it would be via, I would think, an Apple TV or a Chromecast, but it doesn't seem to be the focus. It's like the message at that point. Why would you need to do that? So
Yeah.
that part of the model doesn't. Yeah, it sort of makes sense to me that they're not going to let you do that.
But it sort of doesn't to me, because I think it misses that other part of the puzzle that makes the generally less professionally produced stuff, your TikToks, your lower end YouTube stuff, work, which is social integration. So far, the only way that you can say, hey, I'm watching this great Quibi program is on the app itself. You can't send out a tweet to say, hey, watch this link, which is just so heavily integrated into TikTok, into YouTube, into every other streaming service. The idea of, look, we want this stuff embedded everywhere. Quibi is its own absolute walled garden, which means you can't watch it with friends because you can't throw it up to a TV, but you can't even really easily tell friends about it except for separately creating, a tweet or a Facebook post or whatever you like, saying, I'm watching this crazy thing on Quibi, and then that's it.
That's a real surprise.
Yeah,
Now you mention it, I hadn't thought of that, but that's a really big thing they've overlooked.
Yeah, that's a big problem for them. The other big problem for them, I would say, is actually the price, especially in Australia, because this thing is coming in at $12 a month. And that's expensive for something that's not a really broad-based service, given that that's more than basically all of its competitors. In the States, there's an ad-supported model, so you can pay less. I think it's $5 a month and have ads in there, but we're not getting that option here, presumably because they haven't managed to sell to any advertisers. But to be honest, I think $5 without ads is still a little is the absolute maximum you should be paying for it with ads. It's just it's the wrong price for the target market they're going for, I would say.
Yeah, I agree because we used to criticize Amazon Video because it had stuff all on it, but at least it was cheaper than the others. If this was, $5-6 a month, you could say, yeah, that works. But when it's more expensive than Disney and it's more expensive than Apple and getting up to an entry level stand in Netflix, it's like, am I going to get that much entertainment out of this? And there's no communal viewing option, which some people won't care about. But if you live with a household of people, you can't, all watch it on the TV together. It really is this individual viewing experience.
I find the whole thing with pay us $5. Yes, you can have the content, but it's going to be riddled with ads when it's only 10 minutes at most. Really, really weird, especially for the youth audience they're going for. I just think they'll all just go, nah. But having said that, they have launched, and here's the really weird thing as well. They've really only properly launched in the States, but they don't seem to care about geo-blocking at all because you can access it here. And they've launched, admittedly, with the most generous free trial I think I've ever seen on a streaming service. 3 months.
Yes, I bet you it wasn't originally intended to be 3 months.
No, they've said it wasn't going to be, that they've done this as a reaction to the fact that people are locked down.
Yes, because originally, if you signed up before it launched, you were going to get access to a free trial, and it wasn't really specified how long it was going to be. And then there was this rapid switch. But the reality is, I can see, certainly, there's a note in my diary already to remind me that just before the 90 days is up to make sure I go in and cancel it. And I feel like that's how a lot of people are going to react to it.
You're not alone in that kind of note, sir.
You have to do that when you do what we do, where you end up paying for all kinds of crap you didn't mean to pay for.
Indeed.
I'm wondering who it's competing against, though, because I actually don't think it's competing against your Netflixes and your Stans, because what it's competing with is the other things that you do on your phone when you've got 5 minutes to spare. So it's actually competing against social media. It's competing against TikTok. It's competing against those silly games in YouTube, because it's really designed for that snackable content.
I don't know that it is, though. Like, having watched a whole bunch of it, some of it is just that kind of Funny or Die, and in fact, they've got some content on there, style content. but a lot of it is designed to be sequential, to drag you into watching more and more episodes or more in parts of something. And it almost feels like, and we need to kind of get into the content fairly quickly as well, but it almost feels like there's a bunch of content pitches that might have been made to your Netflixes and your Disney Pluses and even to the big US commercial networks where they've gone, oh, no, we won't have that one. And Quibi's come along and said, money, here, we want your content. Yeah. And then had these bunch of, for example, half-hour episodes, and they've gone, right, well, that's just 3 parts of a story. So I don't know that it's exactly in that space. You're right, though. It's in that kind of weird limbo position.
Indeed, and I mean, and the obvious competition is YouTube, and in fact, with having groused about the price that you pay to not have ads on YouTube is actually about the same. So in that sense, maybe I'm being a little bit unfair on the pricing because I mean I do pay for that on YouTube, and I don't want to see the ads. Lots of people don't. But then you don't pay anything. So yeah, maybe that's where they got their pricing inspiration from.
Yeah. And then there's the content, which is, I mean, it's for a launch of a new service with fresh original content. They've got something like 50 odd shows on there. Although people can't really see the air quotes I'm putting around shows there, because there's some wild and sometimes wonderful and sometimes awful stuff in there, and a lot of, to my taste, trash. Adam, has anything particularly grabbed you?
Well, the one thing that I thought was interesting was actually the first thing I watched was the NBC Evening Report. So like a stripped down version of the news with just a couple of main items, nicely designed for that format. And that was not the kind of thing I was expecting to see, but that actually worked quite well, I thought. And a lot of other times you might want to get that kind of content from, on your daily commute, but the news sources you want to listen to might not be formatted in a format that works in the way you want to consume it. And so I watched that first, and I thought, oh, yeah, this kind of works. And then I went flicking through the shows, and it's a lot of it's that the Apple TV kind of, I can't even think of the douchebaggy word for it. Lifestyle. No, that's not the word. Gus, what am I trying to say without insulting you by thinking you know what I'm trying to say?
I have no idea what you're trying to say, Adam, unfortunately. So
look,
you're looking for the word. You're not looking for the word reality here, right?
Yes. That's what I'm trying.
I was going to go with reality trash myself.
Trash. And let's just go with trash. There's a lot of trash in there that I wouldn't watch, but I had a look at there's the one where people are they're going to be house renovators, but they get kidnapped by drug dealers or something.
This is flipped,
and the production values on it were fantastic. And I'm watching this thinking, this really does feel like a shorter version of a polished show and not just something somebody slapped together. And I got to the end of it and thought, yeah, I'd watch the next episode of this. And to me, that's a big KPI that I actually went, yeah, if I had nothing to do for the next 5 minutes, I'd see where this goes. So, and there's a few other things in there, some drama-y things. I saw something with Kiefer Sutherland and all that. And I thought, yeah, that'd win 5 minutes of my time if I have 5 minutes to kill.
Yeah, it's odd. I've watched through all of Flipped as well, and the strange thing with that is that Quibi has almost the reverse Flipped in there as well, because they've got a renovation show. This is an actual renovation show. So Flipped is comedy, it's scripted, it's dramatic, and so on. It's actors. They've also got a thing called Murder House Flip, and Murder House Flip kind of does what it says on the tin. It's a house in which grisly events have happened, really bloody grisly as well, like exceptionally so. And so half of the program is just, here's where all the bodies were buried. Let's walk around the house and point it out and show you lots of, documentary footage. And then we're going to come in and brighten it up so the kids will play here. It's so tonally deaf. It's just bizarre. Although it did remind me, Gus, that I know Finder had a series where you're looking at house prices for infamous murder sites a few years ago in Australia. So it felt sort of familiar whilst at the same time, frankly, disturbing to me.
Indeed, yes, that was Safe as Houses, and we used to investigate. And the reality was that basically for 10 years, your property wasn't that good, and then after that, people need houses, and so they get over it. That's the lesson there.
Yeah, but dragging up all the footage and saying, and this is where she murdered them, and oh, and we're in the bedroom. Oh, and these are the original floorboards, are they? They've still got the blood in them, have they? Is really it's just kind of off to me anyway. But I suppose there's a market for that kind of thing, and even kind of trashier stuff. There's a one of their cooking shows is a thing called Dishmantled, which is a bit like if people have seen Cutthroat Kitchen, the ridiculous competition Food Network show. It's sort of like that in that chefs have to produce a dish under ridiculous circumstances. But in this case, the ridiculous circumstances is that the meal they're blindfolded and the meal is fired at them through a cannon.
You're serious?
I'm totally 100. This is an actual show they have produced. It is fired through a cannon. They have to blindfold taste it, work out what it is, and make it in half an hour. But it's just a 5-10 minute thing, and it is dumb as a bag of rocks. But I have zero doubt there's probably a market for that kind of thing. I've rarely seen stranger ideas, and it does sound like something that might have fallen out of the Weird Al UHF TV schedule. But it's a thing now.
I am so watching that. Like, I'm fully in there. I think the only thing it's missing is that obviously it should have been hosted by the great Gonzo.
So, Gus, this idea is nothing new. That we go back, they used to call them Mobisodes or Webisodes or whatever. This has been around for, well, more than a decade. It sort of the idea went through a bit of a revival when the iPhone came around, but even before that, why is this maybe going to work now when it hasn't worked before? Or is it not going to work?
I'm still inclined to think it's not going to work. I think it's got a certain amount of visibility because of the people who are associated with it.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Katzenberg doing it. Meg Whitman, the former HP head, is the CEO of it, and they've got people, a few famous people involved with it. So I think that makes people think, oh, this is a good idea, but it just feels like we know that people suffer from kind of like streaming exhaustion after they've got sort of 2 or 3 services. Often that's enough for them. And what these guys don't have is the advantage. Someone like Apple can kind of do all the stuff with Apple, TV and fund it from elsewhere. These guys haven't got another source of funding. So while I think it's a slick execution, I kind of wouldn't totally be surprised if Meg Whitman's looking for another job in a year.
I agree. And I think they've got another problem launching in the middle of the current coronavirus issue, which is it's not really clear how much of a long tail of content they've got. They're releasing weekly episodes of most of their shows, so they can presumably run for a while, but at some point that's going to run dry. And depending on how long all of this goes, they could find themselves in a position where all they've got is the content they've got, and even the audience that's stuck with them past 90 days might go, well, hang on, there's nothing new here.
Indeed, because they outlined plans for about 170 shows. Like, that was what they said they were going to run up to in the first year, but that was very much when they assumed they could have access to regular production. And while arguably, obviously, they're probably in a slightly better position to keep producing things in a minimal, socially distanced kind of way, that it's going to end up biting in the way it's going to end up biting kind of everyone who's involved in the content business.
So in some ways, this is a throwback to the writer's strike, where it forced everybody to redo their schedules and even change the plots of TV shows to make it fit into what could actually be done.
Very much so, but then during the writer's strike, we also saw a big rise in the production of reality, and reality is much, much harder to do when you're a couple of meters away from all your cast members.
So, Alex, the way we use the internet has changed at the moment. The way people use their mobile phones has changed, and the telcos are coming out and they're throwing around some data. What's going on?
Yeah, so as part of the packages that the major telcos and some of the MVNOs, I think, are putting together around people's coronavirus lockdown, they've started adding more data to most plans in slightly different ways for each of the 3 major telcos. But broadly speaking, the amount of data that you're getting is likely to be more on an existing plan than it was a few months ago. But it's a weird thing because it's at a point where arguably you're going to need that mobile data a whole lot less, because if the only places you're going out to and the only places you should be going out to are medical, food, and for essential workers work, then your needs are probably so much lower. It's exactly the same problem in a way that Quibi has, in that you don't need the mobile data so much. We've seen some interesting kind of reactions to this and interesting different models. Gus, are you across this stuff?
I am indeed. And yeah, we've seen a whole bunch of different versions, and it is very much that tension. On the one hand, hey, I have all this extra data. On the other hand, well, what are you going to use it for? And so it does make you wonder. Although it has to be said, for some people, it's become okay. Well, that's how my broadband's going to work. I'm a little bit in this position. My home broadband is infamously awful, and I'm not entirely sure that switching to the NBN will make it any better. But I guess I might have to leap through that in the near future. But I like the idea that the plan I'm on, which actually has an unlimited data offer at the moment, is I could just go and tether, and it's not too bad.
Yes, for those who are playing along at home, Gus has always had the worst home internet of any guest we've ever had. We've had the most trouble getting him on the show remotely than anyone else. He is our litmus test. If it will work for Gus, it will work for anyone.
This is entirely true. This is entirely true. I'm guessing, though, that's unlimited in the sense of your speed limited after a period?
No, it's actually not, because it's the Amasim offer, which they started in the summer, and they've kept extending it. So, and it's been good to see. I mean, even if you're not in that offer, like, we have seen these offers going not just from the big three, but from some of the MVNOs as well. So it's definitely out there. And in parallel, we've then got some super cheap plans from some of them, like Vodafone, where they said, "Hey, here's a really minimal plan you can get into." And I think, if for people who are thinking about their finances, that may be the way to go, especially if you're on a month-to-month plan. Dial it right back until the point when you need it again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this weird flip where a couple of months ago, kind of calls and texts, not that relevant as part of a plan, because whilst people did text and call each other, they were just assumed unlimited, that was fine. And the mobile data was really the thing, because that was what you burnt through. Now, with lots of people stuck at home and sitting on their home Wi-Fi, they're not really using any of the mobile data, and what you really need to pay for are those calls and texts.
But
It is
how
a
many of them are
strange.
actually doing it as calls and texts, and they're not just, if you're using WhatsApp and Skype or whatever, it's still data anyway. How many people still text message via text services and still call via phone services?
But it doesn't matter if you're sitting on a Wi-Fi NBN connected service, then that's where it will route that data first and foremost.
True.
Yeah.
In almost every case. I mean, there may be outlier apps that only rely on mobile data. I'm not aware of too many of them that wouldn't use an existing Wi-Fi first, because most of them will take the view of, hey, the Wi-Fi is probably not a charged thing. Like when you try to update an app on your phone, if you're doing that over mobile, a lot of phones will just say, actually, probably better waiting till you're on Wi-Fi, because this could get seriously expensive. Um, Gus, you mentioned the Vodafone connected plan, which is something like $10. You get 3 gig, but I think they've said at this stage you can only be on it for 3 months. What I find interesting with that, though, is if people get used to that, and there's a lot of figures out there that suggest that 3 gig is not that far off an average use case these days. How do they step back from something like that in 3 months' time to say, oh yeah, look, that'll now cost you twice as much?
It's going to be a really interesting challenge, especially. And my suspicion is that there might be a little bit of extension going on there. Vodafone's been a bit infamous for the number of grandfathered plans that it has. So I wouldn't be surprised if that bounces around. Although maybe then they just switch it to becoming like something more like a prepaid sort of approach.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. And I mean, prepaid, as usual for some of the other plans, gets the short end of the stick when it comes to extra data until you kind of step up the pricing. Although it's pretty much the case, I'd certainly say this, and I think you'd agree, Gus, if you're spending more than about $40 a month on prepaid at the moment, you are spending too much, because at that rate, you may as well go on postpaid month to month.
Absolutely, because there are plenty of month to months that have sort of generous offers there, and so it's interesting. You've got these supportive gestures for like people who are having real trouble. You have the reality that you could adjust things. I don't know whether people will. I have this feeling that maybe lots of people will just go, look, I'm just grateful to have a working phone, and I'm not about to stuff around with that, and then try and deal with if there is an issue switching. And switching is normally a painless process, but as I think we all know from personal experience, occasionally it does go wrong. And if you don't
Oh,
get
yeah.
ported, if you don't get ported correctly, right now it's going to take much longer to fix, because getting hold of anyone in a call center isn't so much harder, because so much of this support was actually operating in countries where everyone's in lockdown, and so the staff can't get into the call centers in the first place.
Yeah, all the telcos are basically scrambling to say, look, please use the app. We're trying to get Australian staff up and trained and working virtually and so on. And that will take time. And it's not that they're not doing anything. But yeah, right at the moment, the last thing you really want to be doing is calling a call center. Gus, I suppose the other side of this, of course, and I know you travel a lot, or you did, um, is the roaming side of it, because everyone's roaming deals. Well, right now, what's the point? Do you think once this is all over, we'll actually see a necessary rejig in the way some of those work?
It's likely we might see a change. It's interesting that actually one of the companies that I often buy roaming sims from kind of sent an email saying, "Oh, we've had to sack nearly all our staff, but we can sell you some discounted long term things that have like 15 months of expiry." And in fact, I went ahead and bought one because it looked like a good deal. But that the way that whole space works will disappear. But ultimately, when it comes back, it will still be it's going to be a useful differentiator. It's always been one of the best differentiators for Vodafone in the Australian market, that they've got a good roaming option and it works for them as a global brand. So that's all on pause, but I suspect it will come back much as it was before, I'm thinking, but it really does depend how long it is before anyone's allowed to step outside the borders of their own nation.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Gus for making time for the show this week.
It's been a pleasure. Now I better get back to those Zoom calls.
And before you do rush back to your Zoom calls, if people want to find your writing work online, or indeed yourself, where can they do that?
They can find me at finder.com.au, and then you can find me on Twitter as GusWorldAU.
And of course, you can catch up with us here at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter at Vertical Hold AU, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as I said last week, we've got something special to throw in for regular listeners. Aussie Broadband's our great new sponsor, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan. The promo code is Vertical. So hopefully that'll come in handy for some of our Aussie listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. As always, thanks everyone for listening. Try to stay home, try to stay safe, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.